Good day, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in this wonderful world of ours. We got a great guest today, a good friend, and then we have a great friend of mine that's going to be our MC today. We didn't have to bail him out of jail, however, which is better than normal. Uh, Canadians don't take American dollars. So, everybody, here's Tony Fortunato, our head geek today, and I'll let him introduce our other friend.
Thanks, Tim. We got good old Steve Brown with us from Viavi, which I always tend to butcher, but I'm sure I got that one right. We're going to talk about GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. I'm far from being an expert. I'm actually learning quite a bit of it, just doing my homework on this webcast. And I found out, and Steve and I talked about this yesterday, that this is going to become enforceable as of May 2018. It's kind of a big deal. And I think the biggest point I can make is the simple point that if you're not sure if this applies to you, I was just saying this to Steve, I read a great article where they said, if you're not sure, you better make sure that you're covered. Just err on the side of caution. So I'm going to kick this over to Steve. I want to sit back and take it all in, and I'm sure I'll just chime in once in a while. So Steve's with Viavi, and I just want to ask Steve just a quick question. Let the audience know how long you've been at Viavi and what your role is and how you fit into all this.
Sure. So I've actually been at Viavi, formerly Network Instruments, for probably about as long as I've known Tim, which is nearly a decade. So in terms of Viavi, what we do, what we're focused on, think of us as performance management, network applications for everybody from the largest carrier networks out to the to large and medium-sized enterprises around the globe. We are also, and we're deriving all of that intelligence through high fidelity packet capture, and then extracting out metadata that you can use for both deploying and managing critical initiatives, as well as troubleshooting and understanding that all of that metadata that you see is backed with complete packet capture and analysis. You can either analyze it using our engines and analytics, or you can easily export it via a web interface out to Wireshark if you're inclined. One of the things that we've noticed is, and this is kind of what leads us into data protection, is in having all of that traffic, that people are using us more and more for post-event security forensics. I would say when we last surveyed our user base, that 45% of our users, in addition to using us for network performance, are also using us for post-event security analysis. Gives your security teams full context behind an attack to understand, everything that was going on within the network itself at the time of that attack, before, during, and after. So fairly important solutions for management, troubleshooting, and investigations, and that's kind of what led us to pay attention to the general data protection regulations, as well as just best practices for security overall. So hopefully that all made sense, and I'm happy to dive in further if you'd like. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is awesome. I mean, people, first off, like I think Tony said it earlier, you got to figure out if you're under the GDPR coverage and or requirements. And pretty much, I don't know of a company in the United States that's not. I don't know of a company in the world that's not, that's engaged in any kind of international business. And almost all companies are international today. Now, one thing you talked about, Steve, and a lot of people get confused about what's metadata. And when I explain it in a courtroom or to a class or something, metadata is the picture, not all the packets and all the information about that picture. That's the best way to look at it. Metadata is designed to show you a human picture, what we understand. We don't understand packets easily and all that stuff that goes in there, but metadata allows us to see the picture. And metadata is becoming more and more. As a matter of fact, it's been accepted in a number of legal cases. So look, things are really going to happen with that. So It's yeah. Need to,
Yep.
if you haven't looked at metadata, you'll be pretty surprised how cool it really is.
Yep. Yeah. In my mind, I think that this is kind of the challenge in terms of security investigations. Whether we're talking about general data protection regulations, which are meant to basically offer an amount of protection and control for European Union citizens over their data, as well as ensure that companies that are collecting, analyzing, storing this information have appropriate processes in place to not only protect and also allow the citizens to exercise that level of control over their data, but also that they have, at least as best as humanly possible, those gaps or security gaps in place, by, for example, encrypting data. Additionally, that post-event, nobody wants to be, and everything is rightfully focused on protection, prevention. But given the amount of breaches, do you have the network forensics capabilities to be able to determine the basics of who, what, where, when around the attack, and then report that to authorities in a meaningful way, so that they're able to take action on it as quickly as possible? And that's really what the legislation's about. To tie it back to Tim's theme, there are several different ways that you can go about investigating security breaches, and each level of data offers pros and cons. There are times to use it and times not to use it. There are multiple tools. You have metadata. A lot of people use NetFlow. A lot of people use system logs. A lot of people use packet analysis. And the question is just simply, what's the right tool for the job? And no different than you can use a wrench to pound a nail. You could do that. It may not be the best way. The best thing might be to grab a hammer. Likewise, if I was trying to real-time understand what was going on in my environment, baseline, figure out what was abnormal traffic, I would rely on metadata. I wouldn't rely upon packets. But then, when you needed to get more granular, when I need to go beyond just simply understanding what a bad symptom is, I really wanted to investigate. That's where the value of packets really shines. And
Yep.
having full fidelity, complete capture really shines when I need to then turn that over, whether to exonerate a network or to show authorities what happens. Understanding that I've got complete capture is really important.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And the great thing about the GDPR that I really liked, one of the first things that came out of the EU and the joint commissions on this was they made it a law. Ignorance or negligence is no longer an excuse for non-compliance, loss of data, etc. And also the really nice thing about it is people know what data is being collected on them. When you look at different breaches, you really don't know what data has been stolen. Was it your social security number, your home address, your kid's ID, your wife's ID? You don't know what was stolen because there's no uniform level of data. But when this release is, it's going to be able to say, hey, I'm collecting this information and this information only, and that'll be outlined. That is outlined in the standard. And that's really cool because that helps us understand what risk we're at when there is a breach. And there are going to be breaches. We're never going to stop breaches because, we have smart people and we have stupid people. And between them two, that causes 99.999% of breaches.
Yep.
Once in a while, luck falls in there, but most of the time it's either stupid or smart in between.
Yep.
Well, what I found interesting about the GDPR, and this does talk about breaches and all that kind of good information, but I think before the breach and before all that nasty stuff happens, GDPR is addressing the individual's right to be forgotten, that whole routine, right? So you can request that businesses, delete my profile, get rid of my data, all that kind of jazz. And if it's not there, well, then the breach is going to affect them a lot less, right? So I think that whole part of it, to me, kind of made it interesting because, yeah, sure, there's a bad thing that happened. We need logs. We need all this good stuff to do. But I think before that, what information are they taking? Well, if their information's not there to take anyways, to breach and to steal and to hack, well, then so what? Big deal, right? So I think, to me personally, that kind of jumped out at me as, the precursor to all the other stuff that we've been talking about with, you know, logs and breaches and all the legalities behind that jazz, right? I just don't know how they're going to enforce the right to be forgotten. You know, if I said, oh, I'm dealing with so and so in the UK, and I know they have my information on their server, and I want to be taken off, I don't want them to have my information anymore because we're not doing business anymore. How do I know they did that?
Well, you don't, but at least you have recourse under law. And one of the things that, and I wrote up a few bullets. One of the things about the new standard is they actually have what they call a DPO, which is Data Protection Officer. This is the individual that will be hung should there be a leak of specific data. Okay, this individual or a team, and a lot of companies are recommending that a team be formed. Okay, and that becomes the DPOT, the Data Protection Officers team. The one thing there, if you don't mind, I'll run through them and you guys can comment. There's about 10 of them. Is that okay? Real quick.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, one of the first things is when someone asks me for information under this new standard, the question is, why are you getting that information? If you don't need my social security, you don't need my home address, you don't need my eye color, my height, etc., then I don't have to give it to you. They have to disclose that right up front. We will have extremely defined laws, the legal basis of the processing of information, and the legitimate interest should a third party be involved. In other words, if someone's collecting my information, I have a right to say, is there a third party involved? They say, yeah, well, then I need to know who that third party is and what they're going to do with my information. That should all be written out when they take your information. The categorization of information. In other words, are you getting my information to share with an insurance company, or with the financial company, or with the private investigator, or whatever, or state or government? Those are they need to be very well defined when you go in there. You'll be getting a piece of paper when you go into a doctor's office or to a bank or something. It'll be on there what information is going to be collected, why it's going to be collected, how long they're going to maintain it, etc., like that. Does the individual, the company, the DPOT or the DPO, is there any kind of reason they're going to transfer your information somewhere? In other words, if DPO is going to transfer information to another DPO, it has to be clarified right up front. Okay, the period of time that the data will be stored, okay, and the criteria for that period. In other words, we're going to store it for 6 months and we're going to dump it, but we want to keep it for 3 years. Why? They have to give you that right up front. As Tony pointed out earlier, the new law allows you to go in, access, change, clean up, and also ask for erasure of your personal information. A really big one is data portability to me, because a lot of times now, domestically and overseas, when you want to port your information to a hospital or to a doctor, it's done in a very public manner. Okay, and that no longer is allowed. Secure data portability now, and you can detail, I don't want you to send my information, I want you to give my information to me, and I'll deliver it personally to the right patient. And also, another real cool thing is I have the right to withdraw my consent. Hey, you guys collected my information, I no longer want you to have access to it, I want it done right now, at that point, right there in front of them. And of course, now we have supervisory authority. So if I don't like the way Tony's handling my information, instead of going to the pub and complaining, I got a person or a group or a team I call, and they get engaged. And that's all over Europe, but it's going to affect the U.S. heavily.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, I think a couple of points onto that in terms of where I wanted to go. Just a couple of comments. One is impact. Two is talking about a little bit of change, and then actually getting into definitions of personally identifiable information. In terms of who this is going to impact, there have been a number of studies done. Vance & Bourne is a UK market research company. They did a joint effort with CompuWare, and they were analyzing large organizations, American-based companies, and found that about 94% of them collected personally identifiable information or had stored personally identifiable information of EU citizens. And when you think about that, the number of multinational companies, they can be small shops. They can have a website that allows them to communicate with anybody throughout the globe. And if you can distribute a service or software or a good across borders, more than likely you've got EU citizen data on your systems, and it's something that you need to be thinking about prior to the date. So that was one point. I think that Tim, you did a really excellent job of covering kind of what changes for companies. It's understanding that a lot of the I guess there are a couple of different things with the general data protection regulations. One is it's different than, say, like PCI compliance, where they say you need to have this solution, this solution, this solution in place, or NIST in the way that it recommends things. Rather, this is more procedurally prescriptive, saying not so much how you're going to achieve things, but this is what you need to achieve. This is the type of control that people need to have over the data. This is the type of liability that you face, but not necessarily how to achieve it. And so that's what's really being fleshed out now. The one I guess other area that I think of is we're shifting in the EU law from kind of more EU driven directives, which is more on country by country basis, to regulation. What's important about that is this impacts all countries that belong to the EU, and likewise that shift over from anybody doing business with EU citizens. And then additionally are just areas of liability. There's also now the concept of when we're talking about control of data, that's the concept of building privacy by design, so from the start, not after the fact. And then additionally is joint liability is now a part of regulation, or will be. So that's the idea that just because you store something with somebody out in the cloud, in Salesforce.com, things like that, that those vendors are liable. Now it's the controller and the processor that can be liable. So that's something else that's different. Final points is, and I think this is more around, okay, so it's great. You've got this liability. We've got counsel on staff that are going to take care of this. How does this impact me as the network engineer, as the security engineer? And I think that it's understanding what is personal identifiable information, that any CRM database with a customer's name on it, with payment card information, with credit card numbers, things like that. You need to understand where those flows are occurring on your network, and understand how it's collected, stored, etc. And that's an important kind of first step as we talk about how do I comply. And I just noticed that the lights behind me shut off in the room, so I will wave my hands, and that kind of explains my waving.
It's Halloween. Come on.
Yes, there you go.
Okay.
And I said, let there be light.
That's right.
Great. So
one thing I think that I said this the other day to someone, and it clicked finally. I was talking about why you needed to have deep capture, like a gigastore or something like that. And someone says, oh, blah, blah, blah. I said, listen. I said, when something happens, you need a witness, right?
Yep.
Deep storage is a witness. The gigastore that you guys build is a witness. And if I have to go back, I really want a witness I can take to court and say, hey, the breach wasn't my fault. If you don't have that witness, I don't think they're gonna believe you. And we're going to start seeing a lot more fines. I was reading an article that said that companies can be fined in Europe up to 10 million euros for a breach. So think about companies over here in the U.S. We've had some pretty major breaches. I don't think I have to name them. I think they've been all over the news, right? Can you imagine a company deciding, hey, I think I'll spend $1 million or $1 million EUs to build a more safe network, okay? To build better encryption, to build better storage, instead of having to pay out $10 million once or twice a year. And if you look at a lot of our banks over in Europe too, but domestically I see more. I mean, think about it. If a bank has 5 breaches a year, you get charged $10 million or 10 million euros each time. That really hurts the bottom line. I think that will be a new incentive for those people that have not wanted to update their networks or spend the time and effort in teaching their team how to protect the essential gold of a company. And the essential gold of companies today is customer information.
Correct.
And yeah, if you're not protecting your gold, don't cry when someone steals it.
Yep. And the
I guess, I'm sorry, Steve. My big question, because I'm just listening to you two chat about all this, and I've got, the novice type of approach to this because, again, I'm catching up on all this jazz.
Sure.
What I'm curious about is with GDPR, how are they ensuring that either people are prepared, and are they relying on the good old peer pressure approach where they'll say Acme is not GDPR compliant yet, and their competitors will use that as a way of marketing them into the business, that sort of thing, or marketing them out of the business? And that's what I'm curious about. Is there more, for example, an auditing company that would typically do PCI compliance, are they going to jump on the GDPR bandwagon and make sure everybody's compliant along the way, either before or after the date?
Well, I think it's going to be like IPv6 in some respects. Not that I think IPv6 will ever be totally deployed. After 25 years, it's kind of getting to be an old hat thing. Yeah, we're going to deploy it. Which generation? But we won't go there. First off, the General Data Protection Regulation group, the authority they call it, I think under the standards. I don't know how they paraphrase. They will set the standards of how a company meets those standards, and how they're going to, kind of like a timeline. I think when people put their foot down and say it starts on May 1st of 2018, I do believe there's going to be some companies that are going to get a release to be a few months late, okay, or a year late, understanding that's going to cost them. And I do, Tony, anytime there's information out about a company or a product that is bad or good, people are going to use it for good marketing or bad marketing, okay? So, I mean, that's the way I see it. Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that, a couple of thoughts were, one, what's different about the regulation. I think the level of fines, there are actually two levels of 10 million and 20 million for failure to comply. It's not to say that it's going to be at that level, but I think that what you've indicated is kind of my own personal belief of, I think that fines nowadays can be easily dismissed as a cost of doing business, and so you're not seeing companies necessarily, not all by any means, usually it's the ones that get caught with their pants down, taking appropriate steps to actually protect the data, simple things like encryption. I think that this is going to change that. In terms of enforcement, it's going to just, I think, really depend. There won't be a cookie cutter approach. You're talking about 27 local authorities. I think if a company is making a good faith effort, has the legitimate processes in place, if you did see a fine, it would be very minimal. It wouldn't be as exorbitant as, I mean, if we just look to the last major data breach involving the credit investigation company, which will remain unnamed. Were basic steps taken? How long did they know about it? Did federal authorities warn them of security gaps within their software code? And if the answer to that is yes, you can bet that there's probably going to be a heavy fine. On the other hand, if the company were working closely with local authorities, not so much when the breach was perpetrated, but upon the discovery, once you have 72 hours to disclose to local authorities. If you did, then they're going to take that within consideration. And the other thing about it is there is a pre-event. It's not just that, I mean, again, GDPR is more about privacy. Security is an aspect or a component of that. There's serious teeth, which is why I think people are paying attention. But what they're going to look for are processes in place. They can do audits. I think that the big four auditing companies are going to they're already looking at this as, this is an area where we can provide trusted advice, and they're probably already handling that. I don't work for them, so I can't speak directly to it, but that's my gut.
Yeah. Well, there was a study done just recently by a company called Dimensional Analysis, I think it was. Dimensional Research, I apologize. Just a quick thing that kind of scary, Tony, this comes to your question. A majority of respondents, 61%, have yet to begun any implementation or plan of implementation, or have developed a readiness plan, which is kind of the same thing. 69% of the companies, 69% of the companies are just now creating policies and procedures. 63% of the companies actually understand what they're supposed to do. And about 48% of them are actually implementing some processes. That's not real help. When you're looking, I mean, this is not simple, gang. If you're not learning the dance by now and are ready to go on the dance floor, you're in trouble.
I think that this is also where somebody who is a proactive engineer, you might ask, what can I do? How could I help out? And that's where you start to look at things like, is your data encrypted? Are you guys looking at where application flows are occurring? So, for example, one of our solutions, we provide ad hoc, just automatically generated application dependency maps. You could use that to map out, if you knew what applications were flowing, the data flows to identify where is personally identifiable information or applications that might have that. Where are they flowing? Are they flowing across country borders? Are they flowing back to the US? Should we look at over time migrating that and forming a plan to do that? Do we have encryption logically in place? And those are really the types of things to start out with, as well as, just good hygiene, regardless of whether there's a regulation or not. Do you have the network forensic capabilities in place to identify, proactively that abnormal traffic's flowing? And if post breach, do you have kind of full fidelity evidence? In other words, do I have maybe metadata to detect what's normal, abnormal, benchmarks in place, and then when I need to, I can mine out packet data for further analysis, know that I've got full fidelity capture, know that itself is encrypted so that that's not a honeypot, and that I can capture everything without missing a beat, without missing an event. And I've got a natural relationship already in place with my security team to help them out if they're having issues. Those are the types of questions that I'd be asking myself. And actually, we're working with customers and prospects. I work with a lot of network engineers to kind of help them map out, understand, and figure out how they're going to be dealing with these types of regulations.
Now that's a great, that's a really good example, because I was talking with a customer a few weeks ago about a dependency analysis, and I was explaining to him what it means, how to get one started, and I explained to him that even if you're using a web browser and that session is encrypted to your web server, but that web server is simply the front end, and then the web server passes things on to their SQL server, and that communication is not encrypted, then you always go to lowest common denominator and you say it's not encrypted, right? The application is not fully encrypted end to end. I think those are the little bits and pieces that people either don't know about or they just overlook, because they assume I'm using my application, I got a padlock, it's encrypted, SSL, TLS, whatever, but they don't understand that that little piece of data may traverse several layers or tiers of applications and servers, either cross-border or even in the data center, and they need to be encrypted as well, right?
Exactly.
And that's why Viavi is part of the new TLS SSL IETF study group. Because we already know that 2.x is really badly hacked. It's been used several times. But I read an important article, and I did want to bring this up. Tony, I think you asked how much will it cost earlier. There was a study done, and the 83% of U.S. privacy professionals expected GDPR spending to be in the neighborhood of at least $100,000 for most companies. We're talking about average size companies, not mom and pops. 17% expected to pay over $1 million, and 40% of the companies said that they expect to spend $500,000. And let me tell you, that's cheap when you're talking about potential fines of $10 million for every event. That's not a $10 million and you get out of jail card. That's $10 million to start with. That's a fine. And also, one thing about GDPR people forget, it allows for individual litigation. Okay? You lose my data, it costs me 70 days of my work effort to have it cleaned up. Not only can the courts set a fine for that, but it also opens up for private litigation. So, you know, I and by the way, Steve, you're so right. I think we need down the road. I think we need to talk a little bit more about data witnessing, because when you have a breach, it's recognition, it's understanding. I recognize I've got a problem. I understand what the breach was. I have a mitigation process, an emergency mitigation process. I have a total mitigation process post, stopping the attack. And then that's when you do your study. How far down did this hole get dug? Excuse me. Huh. My English sucks. I've been around Tony too long. And so, I mean, you have to have those processes in order, or you're not going to do it. And I've seen some great companies starting to think like that. Viavi started doing it from the visibility area. You have the capability of long-term witnessing. Now we just need to figure out how to teach people how to recognize that. I wonder why at 3 o'clock in the morning, when everybody's in bed, we're dumping, full bandwidth, 25 million records down to a IP address I've never heard of before.
Yep.
So just like policemen. A friend of mine who's a federal agent the other day, we were at a high-tech criminal investigation meeting, and HTCIA, and he made a comment. He says, data protection is so much like physical protection, physical security. You got cameras, you got locks, you got, RFID passes, you got safes, you got password, all this physical stuff. It's so much like what we're not doing today in the data world. And that's the end of my comments on it. Sorry.
Yeah, I want to, definitely want to thank Tim, everybody out there that's listening. And I guess just a parting thought would be, if you have questions regarding the general data protection regulations, what they are, how it impacts the network and security teams, what organizations can be doing pre-post event, we have a lot of resources available on our website at viavisolutions.com/GDPR. And you'll find a white paper, you'll find a recorded webinar that we did last week with an analyst and data center architect from the UK to talk about how they're dealing with GDPR. So I think that you'll find a lot of educational materials. And if you have questions about that, about performance management, about network forensics, happy to answer that. My email is steve.brown@viavisolutions.com. So please feel free to reach out if you have questions that you can't find the answers to.
And
awesome.
Keep checking lovemytool.com, because this is becoming a very big subject to discuss. And we're going to see lots from Viavi as well as others.
Yep.
All right, cool. I'd like to just back with Tim and Steve. Thanks for everybody who's watching this live or on the replay. Thanks for giving us a bit of your time. And we'll see you at the next session. Have a good day. Bye for now.
We'll see you. Bye.